To ensure the story makes sense, I need to provide some brief context. I attend a public university in California, which is part of the UC system. Some UC campuses like UCLA, Berkeley, and Santa Barbara are much larger, while others, like mine, are smaller. Most of the bigger ones have their own version of what's called a dedicated tour day, where incoming students visit the campus. In reality, it's mostly an excuse for current students to host all-day parties. For example, Berkeley's is called Cal Day, and Santa Barbara's is Deltopia. My campus is about a 2.5-hour drive from Santa Barbara, but it's common for students from other schools to make the trip for the day. I've never been much into partying, so I'd never participated. However, a few months ago, I realized it was my senior year, and I'd never get another chance. When asked if I wanted to go to Deltopia in Santa Barbara, I decided to go for it. We left Friday afternoon, the day before the main events. The car was packed. Hunter was driving, and Damon, Benjamin, and Armand were along. All of us are over 6 feet tall, so the ride was cramped, but good conversation and music made it go quickly. Once we reached Isla Vista, we spent most of an hour searching for parking with no luck. The parking situation was genuinely that bad due to Deltopia's popularity. Just as we were about to give up, Hunter charmed a sorority girl into letting us park in her spot. We all got a good laugh about that. The plan was proceeding. Hunter's sister, a junior at UCSB, agreed to let us crash on her apartment floor. While that might sound a bit rough, during Deltopia, having a place to sleep is like having a golden ticket. She and her roommates were super laid back, so we partied with them that night, even though Deltopia officially started the next morning. There's one more detail I should mention. Hunter is very friendly, and a lot of people know him. He has a friend named Amir who is problematic. I'm using friend loosely here. Amir is the type who hangs around social circles without truly belonging. He's insecure, loud, clueless, constantly seeking validation, and somehow turns every conversation into a monologue about himself. Before anyone calls me out for gossiping, Amir has done some messed up things to my friends and me in the past. I've earned the right to talk about him. A while back, Amir told Hunter he was also going to Deltopia. There was never any discussion about where he'd stay or who he'd be with. He wasn't part of our plans, and no one mentioned him during the drive. About an hour after we settled into Hunter's sister's place, we decided to grab alcohol for ourselves and her roommates. As the 5 of us left the liquor store, who do we see but Amir, just standing by the curb with his hands in his pockets. No one said anything. We kept walking toward the apartment, and he sort of tagged along as if he'd been there the whole time. The first thing Amir said a few blocks later was, "Why are you guys so surprised to see me?" Was he serious? Of course, we were surprised. We'd never planned to meet him there, let alone hang out. As far as we knew, Hunter hadn't even told him where we were staying. We mostly ignored him and kept walking, unsure of how to handle the situation. Things escalated immediately back at the apartment. Amir asked to use the bathroom, and when Hunter reluctantly agreed, he ran ahead. When Hunter's sister opened the door, Amir just stepped inside and said, "I'm staying here," without waiting for a response. She didn't recognize him, but assumed he was with us. Hunter was furious when he realized Amir had lied to his sister. Rather than getting into details, here's the gist. Hunter told Amir he had to leave, that he wasn't welcome, and that lying to his sister was crossing a line. Amir didn't leave quietly. He argued outside the door for 20 minutes. Hunter isn't the type to tolerate that, so Amir eventually got the hint and left. We partied hard after that, and honestly, Amir was all we could talk about. Later, we realized Hunter had been sharing his iPhone location with Amir, meaning he'd tracked us to the apartment. The next day was wild. Deltopia lived up to the hype. Most of the chaos was over by late afternoon, so we met up with 5 other friends, and all 10 of us went back to Hunter's sister's place. We filled them in on the Amir situation, and they were just as baffled. Another friend, Ryland, said he was pretty sure Amir was still tracking us. He checked his phone, and sure enough, the blue dot appeared right on top of us. The moment we mentioned it, the dot moved away quickly, as if Amir had been watching from a car and was now driving off. It was bizarre. Amir showing up a second time was borderline psychotic, especially after Hunter had kicked him out. We probably should have taken it more seriously, but instead, we laughed about his weird obsessiveness and kept partying. That night, after crashing, I woke up randomly after midnight. I barely had time to process being awake when I heard glass shattering deeper in the apartment. I shot up, looking around. No one else was awake, likely because everyone had passed out drunk. I realized no one else had heard it. If someone had broken in, I was the only one who could do anything. I had no weapon, so I grabbed an empty wine bottle, took a breath, and crept toward the noise. My heart was racing. In the living room, the sliding door to the balcony was shattered. A huge rock sat in the middle of the floor, surrounded by glinting glass shards. No doubt, Amir was behind it. I went to wake my friends when I saw the closet door handle jiggle. I froze, more scared than before. I didn't think Amir would escalate to breaking in, but the thought terrified me. Just as I was about to burst the door open, I hesitated. Instead, I sneaked back to the bedroom, woke Hunter, and told him to back me up. We walked toward the living room, but by the time we got there, the closet door was wide open. I scanned the area but didn't see him. Then Hunter reached into the closet and pulled out a massive kitchen knife. I stared in shock. Amir had literally been standing there with a knife, likely intending to hurt me. He could have ended my life if I'd opened that door. That was the most horrifying moment of my life. Hunter and I woke everyone else, swept the apartment, and confirmed Amir was gone. We called the police, but all that came of it was a report. They said property damage is common during Deltopia and that we were just one of many victims. By the way, Amir had stopped sharing his location with Ryland, so we couldn't show the police that. The next morning, we left early. Hunter was freaked out about leaving his sister and her roommates there, especially knowing Amir had already sneaked in once. Before driving off, he sent Amir a long message, but it never delivered. He'd blocked him. We all checked our phones and realized we'd been blocked too. Over the next few weeks, we heard nothing from him. It was as if he'd vanished. I still can't wrap my head around it. Amir isn't typically violent. He's usually passive, but he knows where we all live, so I'm still worried he'll do something drastic. I'll update if anything happens. Story 2. My name is Arthi. This happened a long time ago, but I remember about 90% of the details vividly. It was late April 1996. I'd just finished basic training and was assigned to an airbase in San Angelo, Texas, as a communication specialist. Being in Texas was great. I'm from Mississippi, and part of why I enlisted was to get as far from home as possible. I was 24. My closest friends on base were a guy named Seabass and a girl named Kay. We were inseparable. Early April, Seabass suggested a road trip to Austin for a change of scenery. Kay and I were tired of base life, so we agreed. Kay drove, so we packed her SUV and left that afternoon. About an hour in, on a mostly empty highway, Seabass asked if we'd noticed a car pulling onto the shoulder right after we passed it. I looked back and saw a dark Tahoe following us at a steady distance. I hadn't seen it pull over, but on the highway, it wasn't unusual. Then Kay changed lanes to check, and the SUV followed. She did it again a minute later, and it mirrored her move. I was confused until the SUV turned its lights on. It was an undercover cop pulling us over. Kay pulled over, and I watched as the cop stopped behind us. I'm observant. Processing info quickly was part of my training, so I instantly realized something was off. The guy who stepped out didn't look like any cop I'd seen. He wore all black tactical gear, but nothing identifying him as police. The only remotely official thing was a patch on his arm with words I couldn't read. He didn't act like an officer either. Instead of approaching Kay's window, he stood behind the car, as if waiting. I watched him a moment longer and saw he was actively inspecting the car, looking through the rear window at our stuff, checking her bumper stickers and license plate. Seabass and Kay eventually noticed his odd behavior too. Seabass rolled down his window and asked if there was a problem. Instead of answering, the cop walked to Kay's window and asked for her license and registration. Kay reluctantly gave it to him. He walked back to his car and stayed there for ages. We started whispering about how strange this was, but we weren't sure what to do. Finally, he came back out with 2 other men. My heart started racing, so I focused on breathing to stay calm. The cop walked back to Kay's window and asked if her father was in the army, mentioning her military bumper sticker. Kay asked for clarification, laughed, and said she was the one in the military, then pointed to Seaboss and me. Us too. The moment she said we were all military, I noticed a shift. The cop didn't say anything right away, but his body language tensed. He glanced at the other 2 men by the SUV. then back at Kay. A weird silence, then he just told her he was letting her off with a warning to drive more slowly. He handed back her license and turned without another word. The three men got back in the car and sped away before Kay could start the engine. We were dumbfounded. Sebas couldn't stop talking about how those guys weren't real cops and would have done something shady if we'd been civilians. There wasn't much else we could do, so Kay got back on the highway. Austin was actually fun, and by the time we got back to base, we'd mostly forgotten the stop. A week later, I was watching the local news with Sebas in the rec room when a story made me freeze. A man and woman had been found dead in a ditch along a highway just outside San Angelo. They'd been robbed and murdered, likely dumped the night before. The abandoned vehicle near the scene was a black Tahoe, a stolen one, reported months earlier in another state. Sebas and I instantly found Kay, and we agreed we had to tell the police what we'd seen. We told them everything, and part of me felt guilty for not telling them sooner. Even today, I think about how Kay's bumper sticker may have saved our lives. I can't help but wonder how easily it could have been us in that ditch if we hadn't been military. Story 3. I've always been a private person. That's why I waited so long to share this story. I don't want it traced back to me, but I think it would be a shame to leave this earth without circulating it. I'm really stepping out of my comfort zone here. About 10 years ago, I was on a solo road trip from West Patterson, New Jersey to Fort Worth, Texas, to visit my parents. I hadn't seen them in a while. I'd moved out of Fort Worth years earlier and hadn't been back much. The trip felt overdue. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, maybe Arkansas or the edge of Oklahoma, I can't recall exactly, my car started acting up. I tried ignoring it, but eventually I had to pull over. There wasn't much around, just trees, open fields, and an empty road behind me. I popped the hood and poked around, pretending I knew what I was doing. I didn't. I was just stalling. I planned to call for help, but I didn't have AAA, and I knew they were expensive. A few minutes later, though, I heard a car pull up behind me, a nondescript white pickup truck. I noticed it didn't have a front plate, or at least not one I could see. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Probably mid-30s, maybe older, but worn down to look older. Curly hair, a long, uneven beard that hadn't been trimmed in ages. He looked like the kind of guy who worked with his hands, a bit like an older me, just less well-groomed. He walked over slowly, inspecting my car as he approached. He didn't ask if I needed help so much as assumed it. Before I could say anything, he was leaning over the engine, acting like he knew what he was doing. I spoke up, told him what was wrong, and thanked him for stopping. He said he was a mechanic, and given how quickly he got to work, I didn't question it. I was already thinking about how to repay him when he said something odd. After a minute of fiddling, he stepped back and gave the engine a look that didn't inspire confidence. He muttered something about needing a compression tester. Without it, the car wouldn't start, he said. Then he glanced at his truck and said his friend, another mechanic, might bring one over. I had no idea what a compression tester was, but he seemed sincere, so I believed him. I thanked him again, and he pulled out his phone to call his buddy. He froze for a few seconds looking at the screen, then put it away, saying the battery was dead. He asked to borrow my phone. I didn't hesitate, pulled it out and handed it to him without a second thought. He took it with one hand, and in the same motion, reached into his jacket with the other and pulled out a gun. I knew immediately what was happening. He didn't say much, just told me to sit on the shoulder and not be stupid. His voice didn't shake. He'd clearly done this before, or at least practiced it enough to seem calm. I did as he said. The whole thing felt strangely normal, like we were just going through the motions. He searched my pockets, took my wallet, my backpack from the passenger seat, even had me give him the password to my phone. Then he drove off. I'd just been robbed on the side of the road. I'm calm now, but you should know I was livid at the time, probably the angriest I've ever been. Unfortunately, there's more. Much more. Someone eventually stopped and helped me get the car started, even gave me directions to my parents' house so I could find it without my phone. I made it to Fort Worth that night. Given everything, my visit with my parents was actually really nice. The next few weeks were a blur, canceling cards, replacing IDs, updating passwords, recovering everything I'd lost. It was annoying and time-consuming, but I squared away as much as I could and moved on. 6 months later, things went south. One day, I got a letter from a bank I didn't recognize, thanking me for opening a new line of credit. I thought it was a scam or junk mail. Then another came, from Best Buy, saying I'd opened a card and charged over $1,000 in a random town in Tennessee. At first I was confused, then it hit me. My social security card was likely in my wallet when I got robbed. The guy who robbed me had everything he needed to become me. The next month was hell. My credit report was a mess. Hard inquiries, new cards, balances I didn't recognize. If you've dealt with identity theft, you know how hopeless it can feel. I filed a report with the FTC, put fraud alerts on all 3 credit bureaus, and froze my credit. I went to the police and gave them everything, but without a name or plate, they couldn't do much. I filed a report anyway for the paper trail. I even called local police departments in the towns where fraud occurred. I followed every step I was supposed to, but it wasn't enough. Things kept escalating. The imposter was extremely cautious. A few weeks later, my health insurance provider called. Someone had received emergency care under my name in Georgia. It wasn't just a billing issue. There were now records in my file that weren't mine. Records that could screw me over if I ever ended up in the hospital and couldn't speak for myself. I reported everything again to the police, but that was the last straw. I decided to take matters into my own hands. From then on, I transformed my life, spending every free moment trying to track the guy down myself. I set up Google alerts for my name and cities tied to the fraud, constantly checked my credit report, scanned forums, and dug through social media. I did everything I could think of. One night, on a whim, I started checking Craigslist in cities tied to the fraud, places where charges or mail had come from. After a while, something in Jackson, Tennessee caught my eye, a posting for used power tools and miscellaneous items. I wasn't sure why it stood out, but the longer I looked, the more familiar it seemed. Then it clicked. Everything listed matched items charged to that Best Buy card. I sat there a while, unsure what to do. Eventually, I replied to the listing, saying I was interested in a few items and asked if they were still available. I debated sending a tracker link or something clever, but I didn't want to spook him. If it was him and he got a hint, I was on to him, he'd vanish. So I kept it simple. To my surprise, he didn't seem suspicious. After exchanging emails for a few days, he gave me a time and a public place to meet, telling me to bring cash. The meeting was the next day. I debated driving to Tennessee, but I couldn't bring myself to. I couldn't imagine what I'd do if I saw him again in person. So instead, I called the Jackson Police Department, asked if they remembered my case, and pleaded with them to help. I gave them everything I had and prayed. Miraculously, they said the details lined up well enough to be worth investigating. They'd at least talk to him and see if they could get any information. The next day, after some back and forth, I got him to say he was driving a red pickup. I passed that on to the police and waited. After what felt like hours, they called. When they told me what happened, I almost fell to my knees. The officer said that as soon as the guy saw patrol cars near the meetup spot, he sped out of the lot without trying to act cool. That alone raised red flags, so they followed him. Not long after, he lost control and crashed into a ditch. It wasn't a major accident, but enough to justify their involvement. According to them, he was a wreck, visibly shaken, panicking, talking in circles. As soon as they mentioned the Best Buy items, he caved. He claimed he didn't know where the stuff came from, that it wasn't his, and that a friend had given it to him, and he'd decided to resell it. It couldn't have gone better. He ratted out his friends, and with his cooperation, the police gathered enough evidence to arrest the real culprit. I've never felt more relief in my life. I won't say much more. Like I said, I don't want this traced back to me. But I will say this. The guy who robbed me wasn't alone. There were 3 of them. The craziest part is that I wasn't the only victim. They'd been targeting travelers and isolated drivers along several interstates, mostly in the South. Eventually, all 3 were caught, charged, and put in jail. I won't say more, but justice was served.